Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Everlasting Veteran Podcast. I have Tabatha here. I am excited to do this. We've been trying to get it on the schedule. And I didn't tell you the last time I canceled. It's because I was going for a new job.
I heard all about that. I'm super excited for you. It's awesome.
I am too. It's the first time in almost 17 years I'm not going to be wearing a uniform.
Big changes.
Big changes. As you can see there, I told you before, ignore all the cameras. I have buttons to click. It's always a little too much sometimes.
He's got buttons and lights everywhere.
Everywhere.
They're just all over the place.
Some of them, I know what they do. Some of them I don't. And it's okay.
If we start singing the wheels on the bus go round and round, then we do.
We might, because I just bought an adult drifting trike.
Fantastic.
The little kid in me never ceased to amaze me.
Very nice.
So kind of dive into your background a little bit so people know kind of where we're going with this episode.
Yeah, so I guess my background is somewhat similar to some people that are clinical, somewhat a little different. I went to school and got clinically trained and all that kind of jazz. Went and worked in an inpatient hospital for a while. I did some court work and I started to migrate into the forensic field. And with that, meaning first responders, vets, and a lot of people who had some severely mental health history. So I worked for the state of Connecticut for just shy of 20 years. I left a little bit early, kind of like you did.
Right.
And with that, I did what's called a CIT program. So I worked on the road embedded with police departments for 12 of those years, and then finished out my career there running mobile crisis. So while I was on the road, I saw a lot of people and a lot of stuff, and worked a lot with first responders and veterans and community people, all sorts. So before I decided I was going to pull the plug, several years before, I went and opened my own practice. And with that, all I see is first responders now. So it's all first responders and vets. I do training for them. I do consulting. I go up to the academies. I bebop around here and there.
Yeah. A lot of people, if they don't understand, like crisis intervention teams within police departments or other organizations is crucial to helping the community.
Yeah. I mean, we started it in Connecticut here. I can only speak for us. And it got started after the deinstitutionalization, and they started closing hospitals.
Yeah.
And one of the ones nearby to us here got closed, and a lot of, patients got let out. And that was good and bad. They went into community mental health agencies. They went into group homes. They went into family homes. And some of them ended up on the street, unfortunately. So the original program started with that, to kind of help first responders and other people in the community know how to talk to these people that were suffering from mental health, know how to respond, how to help them. And then it kind of grew from there. In my own head, I started to see the need that we had for each other and for ourselves, which is why I kind of took a side turn a little bit.
Yeah. Before we dive into a broken system of sorts, it's not a hot topic. It's not really a topic of discussion people are comfortable with.
Makes people nervous.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think most of the time when conversations are uncomfortable, right, people are scared of failure. Because I think, and this is kind of my personal opinion, is, stepping into a uncomfortable situation, but being comfortable with it is the only way that, not the only way, but part of the way that you can grow.
You have to be able to learn to sit with some uncomfortability.
Yeah.
Sit with a little bit of anxiety, sit with a little bit of anger, a little bit of mistrust, a little bit of hurt, and be able to grow as a person, like you said, and get through it. So I always say we're not kind of getting over our crap, our traumas, our things. We're getting through them, because it's always a journey and it continues to take as much time as it needs, as additional stuff is getting thrown at us, because none of us, I don't care how perfect your life is, there's additional stuff getting thrown at us every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very important people realize, okay, if you go to therapy or you go to there's an MD.
The EMDR. Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah.
We'll talk about that a little bit. It's not a fix me. Right. It's not a part you go and grab from Home Depot, right? The bolt breaks, you go grab a new one and you fix it.
Well, that's the thing. People think they're broken. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things is that people aren't broken. But I think it is important to get connected with your person, whether that person is a therapist, a clergy. I joke when I teach that I don't care if you talk to a rock on the side of the road. but you need something, which is why I've been really trying to hound to a lot of the cadets in the fire academies and the police academies and all these new recruits that it's important to kind of find your person now because
Right.
it's not when something will happen. It's not if, it is when it's going to eventually happen. And if you can already make that connection with somebody at the head of time, then when things hit the fan, you've already kind of met them, even if you haven't seen them for 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, me included, I'm not an exemption, right?
Oh, myself included.
You
We've
know?
all got our own stuff. Trust me.
Yeah. And I talk about it a lot because, especially for the veteran community, and I have people, I talk to you like, well, or Sarah Cody at some point from Channel 8 will come on. Well, I'm not a veteran. I said, but you can give perspective,
Yeah.
right? You can get perspective from anywhere. You don't have to be like a veteran to come on the podcast, right? Perspective is crucial, especially with the veteran community transitioning out of the military, right? Because that perspective that you get from somebody maybe never served, all right, is going to be the best light to show you the direction you need to go in.
I always say, you guys drive the bus. I just keep you from going in the gutter.
Yeah.
Please, that's my hope.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to my next point, right? Being in the field for so long and helping others, how do you help yourself to be able to grow and accept what's going on?
Some days I do well, some days I don't. I think trying to take some of my own advice with trying to slow down a little bit. And for me, that's the hardest part because I am a go, go, go person. So trying to slow down. So for me, it's almost comical that I have to write the slow down periods in my calendar. I have to put in those days here and there to take a break, to go do something for the day, to go leave for a couple hours. Because if not, I get caught up just like everybody else. Because my flaw is I hate to say no. So I will always say yes.
Right.
Watch that, people, but I will.
You heard it here first. She's a yes person.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously the important wellness stuff, just like I would tell anybody else, is important, to make sure that you eat well and get your exercise. And sleep is a huge component.
Oh, yeah.
People don't realize, I mean, when doctors and therapists and just nutritionists and everybody, their first question when you walk into their office is, how are you sleeping? That matters. So for me, that's one of my lucky things. I've got a lot of issues. I got a lot of crap, just like anybody else, but I actually can sleep really well. And I think that helps me balance more so than perhaps if I didn't.
Yeah.
But sleep matters. Your brain rejuvenates, your brain heals, your brain fixes everything from what happened during the day while you sleep. So if you are not sleeping properly or adequately enough, that's when you're going to fall behind.
Yeah. And so many different aspects too. And I can talk on it on a personal note because I don't sleep well. Right.
It's common.
And, yeah.
I'm lucky. I'm very lucky with that.
But it took like a very deep dive into my personal health to realize that's part of the issue is my sleep apnea, my sleep insomnia,
Yeah.
and,
Huge.
Part of it is the military. Part of it was, 11 plus years of policing, 10 and a half of that was on nights, right? What it physically does to your body.
The shift work is not helpful. Let me tell you,
No.
whether it's for military, first responder, you name the organization, it is not healthy. It's not healthy for nurses, for anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it jacks up your system. It changes your rhythm in your head and in your body, and it makes your body completely upside down.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it affects your moods, how your interactions, how you may perceive something, right? Your judgment, and I mean, I got to the point where there was hallucinations when I'm trying to go to sleep, he, thinking I'm hearing stuff, thinking I'm seeing stuff when I'm awake.
It can cause a lot of paranoia. It can cause delusions. It can cause mania. It can cause depression. It can cause a lot of things, as well as the regular heart issues and health issues. Right, your heart starts to suffer. Your cardiovascular system starts to suffer. All of those medical systems start to suffer as well. But your mood changes dramatically, and you become irritable and less patient and just agitated.
Yeah. And one thing, it was, I want to say it was probably 2017. I still have it written down in my notes on my phone. I was going to, I believe it was the FTO training. I had already had the CIT training with cable, but I had like a week where I was up during the day, and I chose to use that week is to its fullest abilities. You know, I was doing a juice fast at the time, you know, just trying to get my mind right, trying to like
Yep.
clear my head, like
Reset.
reset and everything. And it came to me like on my lunch break, I'm sitting in my car, between class,
Mhm.
and I'm having a juice, and I'm like, is this what my life has come to? Right. But then it dawned on me and I wrote down, this is my camo.
Mm.
Um, the what we hide sometimes because we are in fear of the judgment or what's going to come of it if we're honest with ourselves and with others to help ourselves grow and be a better person. A lot of times, veterans, police officers, people in general, right? They camouflage who you are and how you feel. And I was like, man, that's me. And I
It's
said to my,
common.
I said to myself, I said, and that was like my turning point for my mental health because I was dealing with like the military, I was dealing with policing, I was dealing with coworkers, I was dealing with the community,
Mhm.
and it was like, man, why am I hiding? Why am I putting this camouflage up and hiding who I am, who Ryan
Mhm.
is? And it took last year I started Everlasting Veteran, and it was the best thing I ever did for myself.
That's been fantastic.
Because not only do get to sit down and get perspective from other people, but I get to hear myself
Mm.
come out with what I'm going through, and hopefully it helps somebody else.
Well, and hopefully you don't feel like you're on an island by yourself anymore because
Yeah,
that's what people feel like.
yeah,
They feel like they're off on an island by themselves and no one can get to them and they can't get to anybody else.
yeah,
The difference is we're all on different islands
yeah,
and we're all watching each other. We just need to know how to reach out to the other island next to us.
yeah. And it's so crucial. Like I talk about it all the time of being the best version of yourself for you first, and then you can be 100% for somebody else.
That's it.
I didn't take my own advice for so many years, and holding on to like what I really want to say because two things. One, in fear of ridicule, judgment, whatever comes of it, right?
Well,
And
because we're taught to be good people.
yeah, but also using it more as like a growth tool because like you want to help somebody else, but it gets taken the wrong way,
That
right?
happens.
And to a certain extent, we do care what our image is, who we are.
That's true.
We if you don't care, there's maybe some work that needs to be done.
Hmm.
Um, but I truly believe in I am not a perfect person, and acceptance of all your flaws as well as all your accomplishments is a good balance to be able to be a good human being.
Very true.
And so I start Everlasting Veteran. I didn't realize like how much help it would be hearing myself say the stuff I was thinking,
We get
and
out of our head. When we get out of our head, it makes it real.
right, right. And you're like, or it comes out wrong and you're like, wow, that's not
That
what
sounded not so hot today.
that was not what
Can
I
I
was
hit
thinking.
eject, please?
Yeah.
Rewind.
Yeah. Which happens quite often sometimes with me
Yeah.
because and I metaphorically talk about my board meetings that I have.
Hmm.
I do them frequently. I'm not crazy, right? But it's a self-reflection
Yep.
moment. And I like using stuff that makes sense to me. Like I picked up along the way, like control alt delete.
Yeah.
Um, control yourself, alter your mindset, delete the negativity,
Hmm.
and use it how I can improve myself. It may work for me, may work for somebody else, may
Yep.
not. But I picked up on it because of, the military lingo, acronyms, all that kind of stuff. And it sticks, right? Because it's easy to remember, easy to adapt. The one thing that's the hardest sometimes is deleting the negativity when you still care about another individual and trying to help them self improve, but they don't want it.
Well, that becomes the backpack scenario. So I talk a lot about in therapy with people that we each have our own backpacks and we each have our own crap that's in them. They're all filled with different kind of bricks, all different sizes, and depending on our age, we have sometimes more bricks than others, and depending on what we've been through, sometimes more bricks than others. And we all walk alongside other people and we want to help them. Just like you said, all the time, we want to help them. We want to help them see their potential, where they could be, what they could be, how they could feel better. And it's important, but it's important for us to focus on our backpacks first
Right.
because we can reach over and we can take somebody else's for a little bit, as we do in the military and first responder world all the time. We hold on to somebody else's backpack, we take care of them for a little bit, but it's still important to give their backpack back to them
Right.
so that you can handle your own stuff because they need to learn to be able to carry it and they need to be able to become accustomed to that and empty their own crap out.
Yeah.
Because if we're always then carrying 2 backpacks or 3 backpacks or 4 backpacks, we're hunched over and we can't walk ourselves, which
Yeah.
means we are no good to anybody.
Yeah.
Which brings you back to your question with me of being able to start to do some of the same stuff I preach to everybody else for myself. And thank God I have great clients, patients, people, whatever you want to use that, you know, when I look at my schedule and say, "Hey guys, like I'm taking this Saturday off," I get a, "Oh my God, thank you. You're paying attention to yourself. This is awesome." I've never once gotten a, "Well, you can't take that day off. You have to see me." Like my people are so good. And I have always said that. And so that's helpful too, because then I don't feel bad because I already feel bad before I've even put in the calendar I'm going to take it off.
Right.
So the fact that they don't come back at me is helpful for me.
Yeah. And I think too the hardest part with that as well is the person trying to help. You have to accept that the other person, when it's ready for them, is when to step in.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed that through my career for years. You first get out of the gate as a social worker or clinician and you have this idealistic view. I see a lot of new clinicians coming out of school that I supervise and they think they can just kind of
Change
will
the
it.
world.
Yeah, well, and will it or force it on people
Yeah.
or like,
Yeah.
make it happen. And I tell them if you sit back and you meet them where they're at and you help them with what they want to be helped with now, they're going to stick with you.
Yeah.
And even if they leave, they're going to come back because they're going to know that you were there and you didn't push them and you didn't judge them and you didn't say mean things to them and you looked at them for helpfulness, not for hurtful. And they will come back
Yeah.
when they're ready.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do like, I talk about like relationships, right? And not in the marriage way or anything like that. But a relationship, whether it's a client, whether it's a friend,
Mhm.
there is a common playing field, right, of conversation when that vulnerability becomes accepted,
Mhm.
where you view somebody that you're talking to, whether it's yourself or a friend or whatever,
Mhm.
you view that person as up here with the trust level, right?
Yeah.
And you're allowed to show that vulnerability, right? And I think it's crucial, like when it comes to talking to people and everything else, is allowing the person to accept when they're ready to trust and be able to pour stuff out. Sometimes I'm sure it's just like bah, like everything comes out all quick, and it's like okay,
Sometimes.
okay,
Yep.
let's break this down, and then sometimes it's like pulling teeth and it's like, well, you said this and this is my experience and everybody has their own way.
Yep.
And I think that's like the beauty of it is having that outside perspective and understanding that everybody has their own way, and if everybody could do the same, like we'd be in a perfect world,
Yeah. Well,
you
there you
know.
go.
We just solved life's problems.
Yeah. Perfect.
um but I do think as far as like on a relationship level, as far as trust, and vulnerability, and they go together because you have to trust the person you're, spilling whatever, spilling the tea, as they say.
Spilling the tea. And I think that comes to the point that I try to get across to a lot of people that need to interview people. You need to interview your therapist. Just because somebody hands you a list of names and says, go see this person, they're good, or they'd be good for you, or I think they'd match. If you go and it is not a good match, you are not going to be helped.
Right.
It's not going to help you. So when I meet with people that say, yeah, I've had this therapist for years and they're all right, they're okay, I can tolerate them, but I don't tell them anything. God forbid I tell them shit, nothing. You know, that's not going to be helpful.
No.
It's not going to be helpful for you. It's not going to be helpful for them. So it's okay to interview people, just like you would interview a contractor when you're getting work done on your house or, anything else, a doctor, a regular general practitioner, you interview them. If you don't like them, you don't like them. That's okay. Because, I may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I'm hopefully somebody's, and that'll work, you know? So I think the other biggest stigma piece is people think that they can't not go back if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you cannot go back. You can say, "You know what? This just doesn't work for me. Can you give me some referrals to somebody else? Can you give me another person who may be a different type of fit?" Or at least something. It doesn't mean you have to sit there and keep hitting your head against the wall and not getting any help at all
Yeah.
just because you feel like you have to because you have that Tuesday at 3 appointment.
Yeah. Well, it's that relatable aspect, right?
Mhm.
Even though, somebody may have not walked exactly in your shoes, just like my life, put 100 police officers next to me or 100 veterans next to me. Our lives are all different,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
But there is a relatable ground,
Mhm.
right? And we commonly think that if you don't do the profession or you don't, have any experience in the job, you're not going to understand.
Not true.
Exactly.
Sometimes you get a different perspective.
Right.
And some people want somebody that's walked some of those shoes and have, some relatable experience. And other people, to be honest with you, want somebody that's completely unattached and doesn't know anything.
Right.
Either one is good. It's again, what does that person who needs the help and the assistant want for them?
Yeah.
That's what's going to work.
Yeah. And I truly believe it comes down to that relatable factor. Like
Mhm.
you feel that person understands what you're going through. They don't have to like go through it,
Mhm.
but they can understand in that perspective. Like I talk perspective a lot and I feel like it falls on deaf ears a lot of the time,
For some people, I think it does. You're probably
you
right.
know, and it's the overall perspective,
Mhm.
right? Understanding the big picture of what's going on because we can easily trap ourselves into one lane and like that's how we view life. Getting that overall perspective to see the moving parts, like, if you could predict what's going to happen, that'd be great, but you can't, but overseeing that and being able to see it how you see it, and be able to understand, okay, the variables here. I'm not really a numbers guy, but I kind of am. The variables here, what needs to change? How do I make this better? Right. And a lot of times, either as police officers, veterans going through some stuff, veterans helping veterans, vice
Mhm.
versa, whatever, that's what we hone in on so much, but we don't really understand how.
Yeah.
Right. And changing a variable or removing it, right? Something's not working, right? And you continuously do it,
Then you're not going to get
expecting
better.
expecting a different result
Mhm.
is, I think, the literal definition of insanity.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Like,
Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
yeah, so it's one of those things like maybe there's a breakthrough. Maybe, it just takes time, right? But if you can change something, change that variable to be able to project it in a slightly different direction, that might be the thing. The thing. What is the thing?
Yeah, the
You
thing.
know? Like it's stuff like that. We use metaphors, we use,
Mhm.
okay, focus on yourself. Well, how do I do that?
Well, people get overwhelmed. And so if you take those variables that you're talking about and you pick one small one, this is the one small thing I'm going to work on today. This is the one small thing I'm going to work on this week. Then you're going to start to see some changes. If you sit there and have this great big goal that you're going to change everything in your life or everything at your workplace or your home place or your marriage or whatever, right then and there, it will never work. And you will feel overwhelmed and you will feel defeated and you will set up expectations that you can't meet. And what happens that people forget about is if we set expectations so high on ourselves, we're actually making others around us feel like shit
Yeah.
because then they feel like they can't meet those expectations too. And how much of us will always say, well, I hold myself to this, A, B, and C, but I don't make my spouse do that. I don't make my kids do that. God forbid. They don't have to, but I have to. But we forget that they're then looking to us all the time. And if we hold ourselves there, they feel like they have to, even if we're not requiring it. So start to change those little bit of variables, like you said, just a tiny bit here and there will make all the difference. It
Yeah.
adds up.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I do find, I mean, we're all guilty of it at some point, but I do find, it's not a matter of like leaking tricks of the trade aspect, right? It's one of those things like in the military as a sergeant, and even the beginning levels, E5 sergeant, and you move your way up, or lieutenants and move
Mhm.
your way up. With that, like it's that training leader mentality for them to take your place,
Mhm.
and grow, and maybe they excel past you, but that's like, I find so often than not, there's so many people that, like, I don't want to share this because they may be better than me.
That's a big problem in society in general.
Yeah.
People start to not wanna help people sometimes, I feel, because they're scared,
Yeah.
and that's their own fears that instead of wanting to help people so that other people can, do the same things as them, be equal, be able to talk and associate, instead they're fearful that they're gonna steal their job, they're gonna steal this, they're gonna steal that, they're gonna surpass them, just like you said,
Yeah.
and that's sad.
Yeah. And the other aspect to it too, like, is thinking that others are beneath you, or a task is beneath you because you're at a certain level and it's not my job to do. Well,
That's a whole 'nother problem.
that's a whole nother problem. And that is a
That's a
whole,
big bureaucratic system problem.
yes, yes. But if I can do anything in this world, if it reaches one person, I've done my job,
Exactly.
and I look at it this way. I'm guilty of it myself sometimes. I've done it, but you have to have that, like, reflection and be like, that's not who I am.
Yes.
That's not the values that are being taught, the values that I want in my life. Right. And that's the other thing too, is get little pieces from everywhere, good and bad, because then, okay, this is the direction I want to go, whether it's moving up in a company, organization, whatever the case may be, or just being a good human being
Mhm.
from the start and continuing that.
That'd be
Right.
nice.
It's a tough challenge. Right. And I challenge pretty much anybody to it.
It's a challenge, it takes work.
It
Again, it
does.
takes work, and it takes time, and it takes energy. I think anything worthwhile takes work.
And a lot of people stay far away from what work is. I think sometimes because we're fearful of what we may uncover for ourselves.
That's the same with therapy. I tell people if you leave your therapy office every single time and say it's a wonderful, awesome experience, then therapy is not working for you.
Yeah.
It should be awesome and wonderful sometimes, but it should be where once in a while you leave, even if it's just that once in a while, and you say, you know what, I ain't really happy with him or her right now. They said something that I'm kind of pissed about, or they
Hmm.
made me think this about myself for a moment. And that's good because sometimes we do that on purpose as therapists because we want you to think, we want you to reflect, we want you to go home and give some thought to something. And so, again, treatment, positive, negative, stagnant, sometimes it can't always be perfect all the time.
Yeah. And the notion of, like, I know everything, right?
Mhm.
Nobody can teach me anything, right? And you know, like you said, you go in and the trigger, right? And falling back on what you consider your brokenness, right? And hiding behind that, as an excuse to why you're acting the way you are, right? I think it hinders the growth in getting through stuff.
It does, but it's the feeling of defeat. It's the feeling of when we start to not feel well, whether our anxiety gets bad or depression, hallucinations, any of the things you mentioned earlier, we start to feel heavy. We start to feel like there's this huge weight on us, and then we become exhausted, and it becomes really hard to move forward and make any of those changes.
Right.
So it's difficult. I think once people can kind of take that first step, like you said, and find that person, find a person, find a rock, and start to have that transparent conversation, even if it's just 30% transparency, they're going to get better.
Yeah.
But you've got to take the step. And sometimes that step, like you said, when people are ready or not ready, that's the hardest part.
Gotcha. Now, I did see on a show.
Oh, Lord, here we go.
All right. So the EMDR.
Oh, Lord.
And
EMDR. Yes.
okay.
It's fantastic stuff. But I got to tell you right now, if I had a penny for every show that has brought EMDR up in the last 3 years that has been completely wrong, be so goddamn rich.
So it's funny. I just saw this on a show
Yeah.
yesterday, and
We'll talk later as to which show. I got a list in my head right
yeah,
now.
it's all American, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you probably saw the episode. They have like what looks like a light bar for like,
There is.
and like they go through. Obviously, it's a Hollywood cinematic like approach
Oh,
to
yeah.
what's going on. Um, what exactly is it?
So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I don't expect anybody to remember it. It's hard to even say off the tip of your tongue when you know it. Basically, what they have found is that, and when I say they, I mean people much smarter than me that have done research for years, have found that the REM sleep that we go through. So, if you remember back to high school and you learn that when your eyes move back and forth really, really fast when you're sleeping, and now our little Fitbits track that and everything, they've found that when your body is in REM sleep, it actually fixes stuff that you've been through for the day. And they actually use the word fix, which is kind of interesting. So, if I go back to when I was a child and my mom used to always yell at me and say, Tabitha, get your tushy to bed, go to bed. I don't care what's bothering you. You sleep on it. You'll feel better in the morning. There's actually some sense to that and some truth to that they've found, so that your body actually replenishes itself. So between REM sleep, light sleep, deep sleep, all these different variations, one fixes your brain, one fixes your body, one fixes your organs. It's all keeping track of making you healthy. Therefore, why the sleep component is so important. With that, they have found that our brains actually, which is kind of surprisingly to first responders and vets, our brains actually don't remember stuff or get stuck, as we call it, on events because they're bad or gruesome. Our brain actually doesn't care if it's really bloody and gross or if it's passive and more minuscule. Our brains remember stuff because of how we think about ourselves during the event. So you can have one event that's very, very gross and not pleasant to look at, and another of just an argument with your spouse over the dishes at night. And if that thought process in your head is, I'm a failure or I'm no good, or am broken or I'm unlovable or whatever the thought process is, your brain will hold on to the event based on what you thought about yourself. So, what we do is we utilize the REM sleep and mimic that in session. So, people get these ideas off of TVs now because they are doing these little spin-offs, and you'll see people wave their hands around, and I laugh because people move like a gosh darn windshield wiper, and it does not work like that. You see big light bars, you see tappers, we call them. There's all sorts of different modalities. But there is a lot of work that goes into EMDR before you get to the eye movements. You've got to figure out what the problem is. You've got to figure out what the thoughts behind the person's head are to figure out what you're targeting. You don't just jump right into it. But when you're ready and you get to that stage, you're going to be put in a kind of state where you're sitting just like us and you're wide awake and you're talking to the clinician in little bits while they put this REM sleep into effect while you're awake. And it resets your brain. It re-puts those things that are floating around your head, those flashbacks, those images, those intense emotions, those agitations, and it kind of puts the memory back in a filing cabinet where it needs to be. So when you pull out that filing cabinet, you can talk about the event without the intense emotions. So it was created very, very long time ago. It was used for vets initially, then first responders, then sexual assault victims, because during it, you don't have to talk a lot. You actually don't have to talk very much at all. So for sexual assault victims, they love it. We do it with them, and they can go stand up in front of their perpetrator. They can get in front of the court. They can do their victim statements. And sometimes they don't even shed a tear because we've now kind of moved our emotions back to where they should be instead of right in front as if the memory and the event happened yesterday. We put it back to 5 years ago instead of yesterday.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I looked at it like in a sense, and not just the EMDR, but events and stuff like that.
Right.
We place emotions on it, and
Mhm.
that's the other side of the brain putting a label to it, right? Of you should feel sad, you should feel happy, you
Yep.
should be angry, whatever the case may be. But really, the brain, like you said, is not really cares what
No.
happens.
And it gets stuck. And so if you look at the brain, you have one side of your brain that's an emotion side and one side that's an intellect. And so what we say in EMDR language is that your brain's stuck on one side or the other, which is why you're either ruminating over and over intellectually of what you should have done differently, or emotionally what you could have changed and how you feel. So we get it to become unstuck so that it works together in harmony instead of getting stuck on one side or the other.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions I have that we could go literally do like a Joe Rogan 6 hour,
I
but
could do hours and hours on EMDR just because it is so complex, but yet so simple. But yes, so helpful for so many people. I mean, now we do it for everything. I mean, we do it for kids who are scared to go away to college, kids who are just nervous to take their SATs, even though they have a 4.3 GPA, but they're scared they're going to fail. I mean, we do it for everything, but it's helpful. It's very helpful.
now I am going to ask this one question because it's kind of stuck in my head.
Oh boy.
The So you have, say you have the people that go through an incident, right?
Yep.
Whether it's a veteran, police officer, anybody
Anybody? Yep.
goes through an incident, and then you have some people that maybe they're not there. They're on the other side of the world. They're on the other side of the country,
Ah,
and it affects them. It affects their life. It's. I'm going to say this wrong, but the only way I can compare it really is, I guess, similar to like a survivor's guilt type of thing. Like they weren't there, but there's some type of, I don't know if it's guilt or whatever.
it's called you have an exposure, a direct exposure, or a non direct exposure. And we saw that a lot with 9/11, to be honest with you. We see a lot where the statistics for PTSD is extremely high for 9/11 for the Western side of the country, which surprises a lot of people. And with that, we can thank or don't thank, I'm sorry, media people, um, the media, because we try to get information out there, right?
Right.
And information can be good or bad. And so I mean it in a general sense and not a judgment sense. It can be good or bad. If you're sitting there and you're rewatching that over and over and over again, you are getting yourself re-triggered over and over and over again, which happened after 9/11. We showed that over and over again for weeks and months, and people would sit on that side of the country not being able to come and help, not being able to pick a brick up and put it away, not being able to respond. So if anything, some of us who responded here on this side of the country got to feel a little bit of sense of help, of worth, of that they participated, that they were able to do something where everybody over there didn't. And so that's your piece of how sometimes it attaches to people that weren't even there.
Yeah. I've the way the mind works and the way thought process happens and everything has always been intriguing to me. Because I'm a take it apart, put it back together type of person.
It's a
Um,
puzzle. It's how
it,
EMDR is to me. It's a puzzle.
yeah, and I love the aspect of it, and I think that's why like I chose the direction with like the podcast and like stuff like that of for myself and others, creating this space where I feel like I tried to make it as comfortable as possible. Where
Mhm.
like, yeah, there's lights and cameras and stuff like that, but like at some point you forget
Yeah.
like it's there,
Yep.
and I feel like, I don't know. I feel like there's some people that there's maybe a mental health word for it. They jump on the train, right? Where, okay, people are getting attention for this. I'm not. So
I'm not getting the attention, you mean? So then
yes,
they need to jump on a train.
they jump on the train
Well,
to say, now, it's like,
welcome to TikTok. No offense.
yeah,
I love TikTok. It makes me laugh. Sometimes I put it on because it's the only way to shut my brain off for a few minutes and I can laugh. But one of the things that us therapists are seeing a lot of is people are walking into offices self diagnosing themselves now, thinking they have all these problems and all these things because a TikTok video told them they had it. So, yeah, sometimes it's difficult.
well, my mom's gonna, she watches all my episodes
Ah,
and
hi, mom.
she is a WebMD,
Ah,
a doctor.
that's
not,
fine.
not a,
Although I
not,
feel bad for her because she probably thinks she has everything under the sun then.
no, it's more of diagnosing me.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
like,
She's your mom.
yeah, like it's like, and I have the proof to show I don't have thyroid issues. Like, I don't have the, like I get my blood work from my thyroid's good.
Yep.
It, and obviously she does it because she cares, right? But there's the aspect of Google, right? And the internet of, oh, I read it here in
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, and it must be true,
I
right?
didn't know for Wikipedia. I was stupid. I didn't know for Wikipedia way back in the day that anybody could add to it and add anything that they wanted. I actually, when it first came out, thought it was like a Encyclopedia Britannica just now on the internet. I had no clue.
Well, it's
Took
like
me a while before I learned that one.
it's like the Urban Dictionary. You can add words.
Yes.
And
Yep.
I've done it just to see if I could do it.
Yep.
And I've like made up words and built a definition for it, and it gets added.
There you
You
go.
know, the point to it is, and it really stuck with me. I had Dr. Lynette Nersbacher on for an episode, remote, obviously, because she's in the UK. But it really stuck with me when she, because they deal with the same stuff politically and all that stuff. They're no exemption, But she said, go pick up, the left side's paper, go pick up the right side's paper, go pick up the common ground paper, and choose your opinion based on all the aspects that you see and not based on just one side. And I think it's true to like the internet,
Yeah.
right? Or TikTok or whatever. Like a lot of people get their news from TikTok now,
Well,
right?
that's the thing. I mean, when we were in school, you went to a library and you
Yeah.
had to go look up through microfiche and you had to go find things and you had to recite them and you had to say, why you listed this as a reference and why you listed that and all these different counter things, just like you're saying. We don't do that anymore. They pick their one source or their one thing that they like and that's their go-to and that's what they read.
Yeah. And I think with technology, obviously it can have damaging effects. But continuing to stay in the mindset of using it in a positive way,
Mhm.
right? It's a resource, nothing more,
Yeah.
nothing less, and leave it at that. It's a resource of information, bad and good, right? Stuff you're not going to like, stuff that you're going to love. And at the end of the day, it's going to either make you pissed, right? You're going to put some emotion on it, right? And that's going to control your day. And so often than not, and I've felt it myself sometimes, where I'm like, "Ugh, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And I'm like mad a little bit, but then put the phone down, and I'm like, okay, that's not real life, right? Not allowing it to control my life is allowing it to be a resource and nothing more, nothing less. And I see it a lot. My daughter, she got a phone, but no phone number. It's Wi-Fi, right?
Okay.
Emergency situation, she can bring it with
Okay.
her on Wi-Fi. Typically, she's with us all the time or somebody
Okay.
we know, right? And there's so many times where that age group and even our older kids, Instagram, whatever, how many likes I can get, and even in this business, because this is, it's not just a hobby for me. I have a full blown business with this. What I get asked from potential sponsors is how many views, how many likes. It's like, do you want to support me or not?
Yeah.
Right. That's business though, right? They want to make sure that their advertising is getting out to the most crowd and stuff. I get
Which
it.
makes sense, but
I,
when it's personal, you start to feel like you're valued or not valued that way, such as
right.
all these kids and teenagers feel now.
And I see the shifting of the tides, right? When it comes to social media platforms being created. I mean, what was Mr. Beast, right? Or any of those like big YouTubers when they figured it out, right? And it became this thing of, I'm going to do something completely stupid. I probably won't get hired anywhere anymore. And I got to stick with this, right? And it took obviously years
Yep.
and they devoted their life to it, right? Now you get this trend of people, they're like, oh, I'm going to be a YouTuber and I'm going to be a podcaster and I'm going to do this and that. I view this as a resource.
Mm.
Like I guess my way my mindset of why I created this, how I'm creating it, and what I'm going to use it for differs a little bit differently. Like there is a business side to it, right? Which I do a pretty good job of keeping them separate. It sometimes blends a little bit, you know, it's naturally going to, but at the same time, I have to keep this in my mind as a mindset thing for me, as a resource for me and other people that want to listen,
Mhm.
want to watch, whatever. And I think it's key to anybody like trying to create something. It doesn't have to be a podcast. Do it for you first, right?
Yeah,
Because if
get a
you're
meaning out of it that
if
way.
exactly, and if you're trying to do it for other people, what does it mean to you? You know, I get stuck in these conversations sometimes because I I can go off on tangents, but there's always like points that I'm trying to make, and because people aren't seeing what you know seeing in my eyes, that's where it falls like on deaf ears sometimes because that perspective, right? They're people sometimes aren't willing to acknowledge the perspective for what it is, right? And see it as a whole. And I struggle with that sometimes because I'm like, hey, listen, like this is not what it is. This is my view of it. Take it for what it's worth. And sometimes, and I'm talking very broad with it right now because it's so many different aspects in our lives.
Different layers. Yeah.
Right? There's so many different layers. So sake of time, right? Because we're gonna have to do a part two at some point. You know, that perspective that you give out to the world, right? Make sure it means something to you in a good way,
Yeah.
right? And it's going back to that being a good human being
Yep.
type of thing. Because if you put whatever you put out into the world, whether it's very small scale, big scale, it has a trickle down effect.
It does.
It has a very, very more than we know sometimes. And the perspective that I got from it when I started this, and the reason why I have that perspective is because the emails, the messages I get, not from, I'm not just talking about other veterans or people that know me or started
Mhm.
following me. I'm talking about the trickle down effect to their family members,
Yeah.
right? Where they understand their veteran or their police officer, the son, the daughter, you know, cousin, whatever, better, you know? And then the grandparents, the people that, you know, really, you know, aren't interested in the super tech savvy
Yep.
stuff, but they've able to jump on YouTube,
Yeah.
you know, look up everlasting veteran and get a different perspective, you know. And when you break down the layers, right, and where it becomes a common ground of understanding for everybody, right, people start to realize that we are in this together. It is the best motion picture called life, and it's what we want to make of it.
Exactly.
So that was kind of a long, drawn out side conversation, but I had to say it because it is important to me because I didn't that wasn't even going to cross my mind that I'm going to get an email from somebody that never served,
Yeah.
you know, and it had that trickle down effect that I wouldn't have crossed my mind that, you know, because you start something and you're like, I'm going to get this type of audience. This is
Spider
my
web.
yeah, this is my niche, you know, and keeping that open mind, right? And this is, I'm going broad and general with it again, because the open mind for whatever you're doing allows you to accept what it is, the value of it. And
Being open. Yeah.
yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of times we put values on things that don't deserve values, right? What's more important to you? What's less important to you?
Hierarchies of things shouldn't be placed like.
Yeah. Can you just make sure you talk a little bit more into the you keep
Am I going backwards?
yeah, you're
Is that
slow.
better?
I don't know if it's the concrete. I don't know.
Who the heck knows? There you go.
But that's kind of like my broad perspective of it. I could go on really deep dive into it. I have a friend, Seth. Shout out to Seth. He was the first person that, well, and Scott too, but Seth and I, we go into this deep dive mental health like thing. And we did like
2 of you together? Lord help us.
almost 2 hours together. We literally forgot, and then I forgot to stop the recording.
Oh, boy.
We took the headphones off, and then like we're talking for another 30 minutes and just completely forgot we were doing an episode. Like
I could see that.
that's how deep we got into the conversation. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yep.
And it just allows, it's like mental exercise, right? And it just like physical exercise is good for you, like that mental exercise of like theory and how the brain works and understanding it more,
It's interesting.
throwing the what ifs in there,
Mhm.
right? And
Nothing's absolute.
literally coming up with like your own theory of why emotions attach to what, and I don't know, I could go on for hours about it because it is so intriguing to me, and I love that aspect of the mind. And
It's complex. I don't think
it's
anybody fully understands it. I don't care how smart you are, how
no
scientific you are. Nobody understands the mind completely.
no I think we've only scratched the surface on the functionality,
Probably. Yeah.
not so much of like how, like we understand how things are connected, why they're connected the way they are to a certain extent. They talk about like we're only using X amount potential of our brain. We don't
Right.
really
Yep.
have understand the untapped potential, you know, or it's just
Which is scary.
or it's just something we made up,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Maybe we've reached our fullest potential, but
We don't wanna admit it.
we don't want to admit it, and we're
Yeah.
making stuff up based on
Yep.
theories and everything else. So questioning, right?
Yep.
Questioning, and it's good to do so in
Yeah.
every aspect of your life. I'm not asking everybody to take a deep mental, detour and figure out what's going on in their brain. But I think that, you know, breaking it down and questioning, right? Something,
Yeah.
anything, and keeping it broad again, because you can apply this with everything:
Yep.
politics,
Exactly.
coworkers,
Just like you said. Yeah.
friends, family. Questioning it allows us to, what's the word for it? I make up words on the show too.
Oh, you already said you have a dictionary and
Yeah.
thesaurus, all sorts of stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah. I literally make up words on the show. It allows us to, we do a comparison type of thing sometimes, compare
Yep.
us to others, but it allows us to, um, once we accept it, we process it,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of times we don't give ourselves enough time to process actually what's going on.
Yep.
To then it's like that, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have
Yep.
treated
Shoulda,
somebody."
coulda, woulda game.
Right. And I think a lot of it comes down to us truly allowing ourselves to process what we see, what we hear, what we say, what
Mhm.
somebody else says, and then making a good decision. Right. And I'm just going to leave it like that because it can be applied to anything.
You're absolutely correct.
Thanks.
It's good across the board.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
really one of those things that I try to do it in my own life too. Because I'm a firm believer, if you're going to walk the walk, you have to talk the talk. And you have to do it yourself. Like you can't just talk about it and not do it. So like when I talk about the control alt delete and
Mhm.
talking about removing negativity out of my life and those variables, stuff that I can control, like I apply the work and the effort to. The stuff that I can't control, I have to let it go.
You have to let it go because
You
if
know?
not, it consumes you, and that's where you feel heavy and defeated.
Yeah. And like Craig Wayne Boyd said, let the rubber ducky roll off your back.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
that episode, when I had him on, people were like, he's not veteran. He's a country singer. I'm like, okay, dude, go listen to the episode, watch it. And then the comparisons, and this is why I talk about comparisons, because like he compared me similar to Garth Brooks,
Okay.
of how he talks about himself, right? He talks
Mhm.
about Garth Brooks, the entity, the musician,
Yep.
and then there's Garth,
Mhm.
right? Hearing that from him allowed me to get that perspective. And he was not saying I'm Garth Brooks, but he was saying how I operate and do things with Everlasting Veteran, the
Yep.
podcast, is very similar.
Mhm.
And I didn't think of it that way, until he said something, and it's a great compliment because Garth Brooks is an amazing individual and he's famous. He's a good singer and stuff. But it's not that. It's understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm actually doing it and the effects that it's having,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know sometimes unless we're told. We don't understand completely the outside perspective until people give us that perspective, and
Very
being able
true.
to listen to it and accept it, process it for what it's worth to you, not everybody else. Right. Because I think self worth, if we're going to put like a worth thing on it,
Oh boy.
I hate that. But my point for it is when you're putting a worth to it, right? We work so hard on others, right? We give advice, all that kind of stuff, but we don't sometimes put the work in for ourselves.
Well, again, because we're all caregivers in some aspect. We all want to fix other people. We all want to help other people, and so we take a back seat.
Yeah.
We do that a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think it's important. It's like a lot of times, and I really think I started the podcast because I talk a lot. I accept that. I talk a lot.
Never.
I don't talk too much. I'll put it that way. I don't talk too much. I need to talk more. Right.
There you
I
go.
think that's what people are saying. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's an avenue approach for me that aids in my improvement in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where you have to be, I don't you it's self-care, not selfish. It's
Yeah, it's
self-care.
self-care. Absolutely.
And you do have to be selfish when it comes to self-care because
You
it's you.
do. You do.
You know?
Because no one else is going to get it for you.
No. No,
Mhm.
nobody's got the thought that you have, right? Until like you
Put
put
it
it
out
out
there.
there. And if you put it out there, maybe it comes out wrong,
Yep.
right?
Oh yeah.
And that's the thing, is saying stuff out loud, right? Good or bad, right?
Mhm.
You get it out. Like they talk about that half glass full,
Oh
all
yeah.
that
Yep.
stuff. Empty your glass a little bit.
Mhm.
The metaphorical universe is gifted me beyond anything when I started this, because metaphors and me, I question all of them because I want to try to understand why it started, who started,
Okay.
you know, and
Figured
maybe
out the puzzle.
maybe it meant something different when it actually started,
Sometimes they did, depending on them. Yeah.
you know? So I don't know. I'll leave that alone because I could go on for another thing, just an episode of metaphors. Um, Now let's kind of dive into the stigmas of mental health, right? I'm gonna also tag along with a substance use after a traumatic incident.
Okay.
So the stigmas around mental health, we touched on a little bit.
Mhm.
The one thing, and you brought up a good point years ago when we talked about it, and you talk about it a lot, is not adding substance. A lot of times ends up being alcohol, right? After a traumatic incident, and the effects that it has on the brain, being able to process that stuff.
Mm.
So if you could dive into that a little bit, so people can understand, what I understand now, what a lot of other people that you've talked to understand,
Yep.
and how it has that effect.
Sure. So I always say I'm not the alcohol police. I'm not the cannabis police. I'm not the substance police. Um, it's really not, it's looking at differences. So if you have somebody who has, for example, always done a 6 pack every week and that's their average, and now they're averaging a 30 pack or a bottle of bourbon or something else, then something's going on, right? It's not necessarily the fact of use, it's the fact of the increase in use over time because of something. And a lot of times we are trying to feel better, right? Because let's face it, alcohol helps us sleep at the beginning. It helps tone our body down a little bit. It helps relax us. It helps us get to sleep. So after an event, it often will help us sleep for a little bit. The problem is if you go back to the EMDR and the REM sleep and just trauma in general, and trauma uses a big word across the board for anything. Like I said, you can get a fight over the dishes. But if our brain is not sleeping properly because it's induced with a substance, then it's not going to heal the way it needs to. So, although the alcohol, the cannabis, or whatever else is helping us fall asleep, it's not still processing and fixing the things properly because it's being embedded and induced with something else. So, what they're saying now, what they've found is that if after an event you can actually withstain from having the substance, whatever the substance is. If you can withstain from it for about 3 to 4 weeks, you have a significantly better chance of never having symptoms and definitely have a significant decrease in having PTSD. So, a lot of times we're trying to teach people now through peer support and through wellness and all these things that we're doing, especially here across Connecticut, on decreasing the use, especially after an event, increasing the happy use of things, of positive hobbies and positive activities, and all sorts of things that some people think is just foo foo and doesn't matter, but will actually help you heal. And then you wanna go back and have your booze in a couple weeks. You wanna go back and go to dinner and have your wine. You wanna go out to the ball game and have your beer or whatever. If that's not something that's giving you a problem over time to begin with, then you're gonna be okay. But not introducing it right after a trauma because your brain is trying to heal.
Right.
So it's almost like you sit there and fall off your bike and you break your leg. You're gonna go to the ER, you're gonna get your leg x-rayed, you're gonna get a cast put on your leg, and you're gonna lay down for a couple weeks and probably have a little bit of crutches. You're not running around playing basketball again with a broken leg. You have to let it heal. And I think the misconception is people forget, can't see your brain.
Right.
It's all covered by all this crap.
Total
So,
darkness.
yeah, you can't see it. So we can't see when it's bruised. We can't see when it's hurting. Can't see when it's bleeding. Can't see any of that stuff. So it's really wrapping it up in order to be able to heal. So the non-substances, or definitely reduction in them if you can't non, as well as sleep are your biggest assets after an event.
Mhm.
Absolute biggest assets.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do, and all the veterans are going to know, you come back from deployment, the first thing you do
I know.
is you go and you get banged up
Yep.
at a bar,
You get
you
drunk.
know,
I know.
get drunk, and a lot of times too, like,
Peer
you,
support, peer support.
peer support, and it's good for the soul sometimes,
Mhm.
but making sure that the fallout, right? The fallout,
It's good until it's not. Just
right?
like the alcohol that works to help you fall asleep at the beginning, help you feel a little better. After a while, it actually makes it worse. It actually makes your sleep messed up because it changes with your sleep rhythm. It actually makes your nightmares worse. It actually makes your anxiety worse. And because it's depressant, it makes your depression symptoms worse.
Mhm.
So, what works for a little bit is great, but then eventually it doesn't work so hot anymore.
Do you think that's why, like, a lot of veterans, police officers, uh, let's speak just to like the veteran population.
Mhm.
Do you think that that's why a lot of veterans, that do suffer from PTSD or anxiety or whatever, those symptoms come up years down the road? Do you think that's a big part to do with it, of, in a sense, like ignoring what's actually going on?
I think it's a piece of it. I think the substances has not allowed the brain to heal. The substances has also started to change the pathways in your brain. So your brain now operates differently. And then you'll also see an increase with people who retire. Because what happens is a lot of times we have these containers. So I call it one world, you have, I don't want to say normal people because none of us are normal, but you have people that are all over and their symptoms are everywhere. And we teach them how to contain themselves and how to put things in boxes so that they feel better and they can get amongst their day. But then you have vets and first responders that we are extremely good at containing. We do containers every single day because that's how we function and that's how we get through our job. That's how we get through deployment. That's how we get through our task, our function, whatever mission we were told to do. The problem is then when we get home, we fall apart because now there is none of that. So the container's open. And what I always say in my office is, you've contained everything with duct tape and now the duct tape's leaking. And so we've got to figure out a way to recontain it so you can stabilize while we then work and then start to take the container apart one little piece at a time while we fix the stuff that's inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback off of that, I think that a lot of times, myself included, everybody does it,
Mhm.
is, that self identity, right? You're known for, you know, being in the military or being a police officer, a
Oh, yeah.
firefighter. That's who you are. That's your life. And then when that you leave that, right? You didn't take the time to have your own identity of yourself. And I think that's why a lot of people, veterans, first responders, people that are in any type of field that it's been their life.
Yep.
That they go, I don't know who I am.
Yeah.
Right. They don't have the purpose. That self-identity is not there. The will, the drive to do anything goes away, and they're stuck in that depressive. Is that a word?
Depressive. Yeah.
Okay. That depressive state, right? And
It happens when we stop, and retirement's a big thing, or getting close
right.
to retirement. I tell
Yeah.
people, when you're getting close to retirement, that's a great time to start to see somebody or talk to your rock, because
Yeah.
you need to start to plan things. You need to start to plan what you're going to do and what your life's going to look like, and build up those external supports and activities if you haven't fostered them throughout, if you
Yeah.
haven't continued them. And that's why it's so important to, yes, have friends and people that you work with and supports, but make sure you have them on the outside, having friends and family and activities that you like to do on a regular basis throughout your career, whatever that career is, so that you have that always, no matter what.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw another metaphor out there. All right. Because I do think this in a literal sense, as if people, a lot of people talk about journals and,
Mhm.
writing stuff down. And
Yep.
I do think it's important. I do it like on my phone when I have thoughts and
Yeah.
stuff like that, because you can see it, you can read it out loud.
Yep.
Turning the page, starting a new chapter,
Yeah.
right? That metaphor, if you use it in a literal sense,
Yes.
right, it has such a good effect, like on your life, of actually writing down what you've done and
Mhm.
where you want to go, and starting that new chapter, turning that page, and actually getting it out of here and putting it down where
Yep.
you can see it, right? Because maybe you write it down and it doesn't come out right, or you
Mhm.
say it and it doesn't come out right,
Yep.
right? You can actually start to process and figure out that stuff that's in your cabinet, right? And work through it to where you feel good about it, And I think part of that too is if you are, feel lost, right? I hear this a lot. I feel lost. I don't know who I am.
Mhm.
I don't have a purpose,
Yeah. Common.
stuff like that. I think that will help because it shows, it's like your life resume, right? It's your, not for a job, right?
Mhm.
It's your resume of who you are, what you've accomplished, what you've done.
Mm.
What's the next thing to put on your resume, And that's how my brain works with it.
It can be very helpful with people. It also can be helpful with people to, once you've written them down, to burn them, and to
Yeah.
have that catharsism of burning it and letting it go, and not ruminating about it. Because one thing about journals is, it's okay to finish them and to put them on the shelf, and then 6 months, a year later, pull it out, read it, see how far you've come, seen the journey that you've done, but not to sit there and just keep rereading it every single day.
Well, it goes back to like how you were saying, getting stuck in that
Yeah.
mental
Yep.
thing, the thing.
Yeah.
But it goes back to that, right?
Exactly.
And harping on it, prohibits the forward progression
Exactly.
that allows yourself to grow, and we're not condoning just open burning everywhere. I just want to say that right now. But,
Well,
you know, fire pits, camp yard,
permits are nice.
yeah,
Need
permits,
permits.
but it's one of those things where it has a feeling,
Mhm.
right? And we, as human beings, we always put feelings to it, right? Don't allow your emotions to get the best of you.
Yeah,
There's another one,
exactly. Yep. God
like
forbid.
God forbid,
Mhm.
Um, but it's crucial to being able to grow. It really is, and I think that metaphor, because we talked about like writing books and
Mhm.
wanting to put stuff down on paper,
Yep.
and we're not going to say anything about the title or anything like that, but we are going to talk about a broken system.
Yes, we are.
That
Mhm.
we're going to touch on it because I think we can really dive into it in a full another
Later date.
episode,
Yeah, it's quite.
um but a lot of people a lot of people feel the criminal justice system,
There's
the
that
mental
F word. Better watch it.
what, fired?
Feeling.
Oh, I was like, I already got a new job. I left. I'm not getting fired. um, yeah, it's the feeling, right?
Yep.
So it's the mental health system's been broken for a while.
A lot of systems are broken.
A lot of systems are broken. Um, and it goes back to like what we were talking about, like fixing,
Mm.
right? So then it starts that cycle again of where are the deficiencies?
Mhm.
Where are the resources not being used? Are there resources that aren't even there? And how does it change? How does it change for the better?
Well, sometimes we need a reallocation of assets, I say. We need to shake things up a little bit. One of the things that I've noticed is that Fortune 500 companies, if you look at them, they have focus groups. They pull their staff in, they pull their people in and do focus groups. And they ask them legitimately, anonymously, what works and what doesn't. And I always used to say that if they had ever pulled some of us from some of our jobs that I know I've had and actually asked us which programs need more funding and which programs could you pull some from because it's either not working or it's old or it's changed, it's just allocated differently. Where could we do things? They don't usually ask those things.
Well, so on a smaller scale too, the whole anonymous thing, right,
Mm.
is sometimes a touchy subject as well.
Mhm.
You know,
It can be.
because there are sometimes, where there's people in fear they want to say something because, of the backlash, ridicule, whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's also the other side to it where, you know, you have people that can't accept feedback and
Yes.
then go after the person.
Well, that
You know, it doesn't
happens a lot.
it happens a lot. It doesn't happen all the time,
Mm-mm.
right? And it doesn't happen everywhere all the time,
Mhm.
but it does happen, and in order to like when you have focus groups, right? You know, having the best computers or having the best working space and all that stuff, it's great, right? We like new stuff. It's like Christmas, but it's not the root
Not
of
what's
the culture
needed.
and climate, right? It's not the
Mhm.
root of it. And so often than not, the point gets missed on really having a true culture and climate overhaul
Mm.
of sorts because people are uncomfortable with change.
Or there's a uncomfortability again.
It is.
Mhm.
And it comes down to that being comfortable getting uncomfortable,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Because in a personal aspect, a singular person to large organizations to the entire country to
Mhm.
it can be applied anywhere. If it's not working, right? What is going to work?
Yeah, what's the plan to try to fix it?
Right. And it may be a little bit different depending on, the organization,
Mhm.
but the root of it is listening to the people that have good ideas and allowing them to have a voice to be able to say something, right? Where their experience somewhere else may bring something new to the table that you never expected. But if before that even happens, no, we don't want to hear it, you know?
Well, that goes back to what you said originally of some people being fearful of others knowing too much, knowing more, surpassing them, or whatever else.
Right. And I say this all the time. It happens in the military, it happens everywhere,
Yep.
right? It is a human nature thing. And I hate that thing too. The human nature of us to, you know, put a stop to somebody else's success because we don't want them to be better, right? Why is that like considered human nature, right?
Sad. It's
You
very
know,
sad.
it's stuff like that where I'll literally sit on the couch over there. I'll like sit in my truck, sit on the recliner, and I'll literally think of like how it evolved, right?
Mhm.
That in depth mental journey of why it evolved the way it did for humanity,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And why is it perceived a certain way and all this other stuff, right? And for me, I think that we're going to get back to the point now, listening to others that, okay, maybe their experience elsewhere is exactly what an organization needs. It may not be pertaining to doing the job,
Mhm.
right? It
Yep.
pertains to the culture and climate, the environment in which an organization has.
Yep.
And in order to do so, that unanimously side of things, if people can just be comfortable with getting constructive criticism and accept that we all fail,
Mhm.
right?
They
We all fail. We have failures. We're going to fail again.
Mhm.
It's not going to be perfect, right? And literally accepting it, right? Screwed up.
It's back to expectations again for
Right.
ourselves and for others.
And it's this circle of
Mhm.
life, right? You
It's a
know?
circle.
Um, it's this ever, if you allow it to, an ever evolving thing, right?
Mhm.
But when you don't allow it to evolve, you're hindering the progress for everybody,
You're
right?
absolutely right.
You know, you're hindering the progression, the forward progression, for an individual, for an organization, for the people that use those services, and this gets applied everywhere, mental health services, police departments, military, the shortage everywhere. People don't want to work right now. That's one thing. But if you look at some of these companies where people have been there 30, 40, 50 years,
Yeah, long time.
why did they stay?
Yeah.
Right? That's the question. Why do they stay? Why are they leaving?
Oh, you're seeing more leaving than staying now.
And where is it's not a matter of putting fault on one
Nope.
individual, right?
Mm-mm.
It's a bigger picture thing. And I've been trying to say this for years, whether it's the veteran community, where it's organizations I've talked to, my own job. You cannot go through life and think that you know it all, that you have the best answers, and having that. I hear it from buddies that get out of the military. They start a job, they're there for like 3 months, and their boss won't listen to them,
Mhm.
and they quit. They go on to something else, and like my transition was a little bit different. I
Mhm.
went into policing and I stayed there for 11 plus years. Um, but I had to make a change for my own life, right? Because my direction, that crossroad, right? Not metaphor,
Mhm. I know.
that crossroad in my life, it was for me, right? I have more to give to the veteran community and in a different holistic approach, right? And what I do. And I felt for me, that's where I want to be, right? It's a straight personal and
It's a
professional
transition.
decision in a transition.
Mm.
And I had a conversation the other day with one of my buddies. I said, dude, like you and I have been out for like, and I officially got out in 2017, but out of active duty since 2012, right? I don't know civilian,
Yeah.
right? Other than before the military, right?
Mhm.
Over a decade of service in a uniform in some capacity, right?
Mhm.
Is I think the biggest challenge for veterans or people retiring from any profession or getting out. You've done it for so long. How do you continue having that feeling of purpose, And a lot of us lose it, not like in a literal sense,
I
but,
know what you mean.
and it's one of those things you have to do those preparations, the 5, the 10-year plans,
Yep.
and if it doesn't go the right way, okay, it's life, ebbs and flows, stuff changes. You gotta let that rubber ducky roll off your back.
Exactly.
What do you talked about the Fortune 500 companies. What do you think, other than, I mean, obviously the focus groups are great. Out of those focus groups, when an organization has somewhat of the answers and it
Mhm.
gets ignored, how damaging is that to people's mental health that work there?
Well, it kills morale. I mean, one of the biggest traumas is betrayal trauma. And that's a huge trauma for vets and first responders that when they feel that their organization is not having their back, not supporting them, that is sometimes a bigger trauma than the actual event that they went through.
Yeah, I do think so, because it's like we talk about, thin blue line, and we talk about all the
lines.
all the lines now. The yellows, the greens, and reds, and everything else. It's that connection that we strive for, right? The common playing field to get there with people that we trust, people that we feel have our back, people that are going through the suck, right? And we had this saying in the military: "I'll embrace the suck," like hurry up and wait. Like it was constant all the time. And I think a lot of times, the veteran community with the VA, right? It's a hurry up and wait. Hurry up, get your appointments done. Now you're waiting for somebody else to decide, right? And I just had like a final decision on one of my, it was my breathing. I just had a final decision, but it took 300 and something days, right? But they want to make it, but if you miss an appointment, right, it takes you even longer, right?
To go backwards and start over.
And I think part of that is why the transition is so difficult sometimes too, because now, okay, the contract's done. That's where that feeling of I've been forgotten, right? Because the services that they say are there, right? It's like pulling teeth, right? And it's like, why?
They make it difficult.
They make it difficult. And there's, granted, there are people out there that try to take advantage of whatever. I do not believe that there is too many people taking advantage of the system, that it's clogging it down so much that somebody that deserves their benefits has to wait. One of them took 2 years for me, right? I had all the appointments, made all the appointments, never missed an appointment. 2 years for a decision. And I'm just, okay, we'll find out if they think,
right, exactly.
I should have benefits, and it's not about the money. It's not about, the healthcare and stuff like that. It's okay. I want this on record. So when I'm 85 years old and it becomes more of an issue,
It's about being heard.
yeah. And it's about being heard too. There's a bigger thing to it. And I think a lot of times that point gets missed with organizations across the board, allowing people to feel like they're being heard, and then implementing effective changes based on what you hear, and I think we just solved how to be, a better person and life in general. And
we fixed it all. That's it.
We should run for presidency.
Fantastic. There you go.
Like,
perfect.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of like how my brain works, and
makes sense.
It makes sense up here all the time.
It sounded okay on the outside too today.
Yeah, somewhat okay, but it is such a journey. If anybody takes anything from like listening or watching, it is a journey.
Absolutely,
right?
For every one of us.
Every one of us. It's like the best motion picture you'll ever see, and it's our decision to make it better or not. And that's pretty much it.
That's it.
So
perfect in a nutshell.
Yeah. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And
absolutely.
We'll definitely have to do a follow-up because there's way more to talk about.
Sure. Absolutely. Whatever you want.
And we'll do more of piece by piece of stuff, where you can really be able to like show your expertise. Right. But I do think it's important that whenever you're going through something, sometimes the unorthodox approach works the best.
You're absolutely right.
And doing it yourself and figuring it out, right? That puzzle, right? Doing it yourself and figuring it out is even more rewarding, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, like with the dog program that I started, I don't just, I pair with breeders. They donate the dog. I pay for the training, for the PSD training. I didn't want to create a program where I'm just handing a dog that's trained, boom, done,
right.
See ya. They have those, right? I wanted to create a program where there was like intent in it, where you can do the training from your home, right? You're building that connection, you're building that bond, you're doing something.
There's a purpose.
There's a purpose to it, right? If if you can't find it, right, yourself, sometimes you have to rely on others to help find it,
Mhm.
right? And I'm not my the stuff I do is not perfect, but that's why I created the dog program the way I did because for me, that's what I would want, going
Mhm.
through it.
Yep.
And, like I don't have a service dog, but I have, one dog up. Well, I have two dogs. The one upstairs that's, almost 11 years old,
Mhm.
right? Him and the dog before him, have helped me out through so much, right? It's kind of like how they have like equine therapy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Animals have that unconditional
Love and attachment.
love and attachment, right?
Mhm.
And when it got broken down to me, like the equine therapy, I'm like, service horse? What?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing is that particular animal,
Mhm.
right? Unlike, really a dog, they can get aggressive. They can be very standoffish. I compare the horses similar to like a cat, right? I'm like a cat
They
person.
have their own
They
personality.
have
That's
their own
true. Mhm.
personalities. It's different, right?
Yeah.
And there's that trust, right? And
Mhm.
then when that trust gets earned on both sides,
Mhm.
right? That's where the healing starts, and really all animals do it to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Dogs are great for it. But that equine therapy, it's a different
It's
playing
very
field.
different. Yeah.
Very, very different. And just overall looking at it, the size of the animal
Mhm.
could destroy you in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And then that trust that you build, and I think it's such a great thing. There's one down the road, the equine therapy. They do amazing work with veterans. There's a lot that are starting to pop up,
Yeah, there's a couple in the state now.
yeah. And I think it's absolutely great. But my point is, I started the dog program the way I wanted, right? Because of the red tape,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
I don't have anybody telling me, no, you can't do that, right? No, I can. It's my company,
Mhm.
right? I don't have the VA telling me, no, they can't get a dog. No, they can,
Mhm.
right? Here you go.
There you go.
The only thing I require for it is proof of service,
Mhm.
right? And you are getting registered, you and the animal. Like it's not a pet, it's not for your son,
Mhm.
it's not for your dog, it's for you, right? There's people I've talked to, and before we wrap this up, they've waited like 4 years
I know.
sometimes
It's sad.
to get a service animal. And the federal government won't recognize it, like, because we dive in the pharma thing a different day,
Mhm.
right? Because it's that unorthodox, like it's kind of like how like medical marijuana, like they don't want to admit that there are good effects, right? And the war on drugs and the Reagan administration started that and classified it, all that kind
Mhm.
of stuff. Um, because there's money behind it, right?
Yeah.
And for me, that was an issue when it came to like service dogs for veterans, right? There was a money aspect behind it, right? So you're telling me that you're putting a value on somebody's life. That's how I viewed it. And I said, nope. Like, and within a year, I was able to get out 9 dogs,
Well, you're able to do things differently, which is great.
and is it perfect? No, right? I'm always looking for improvements, but for the time being, it
Mhm.
seems to be working,
Good.
you know? Well, enough about that. We'll definitely talk soon. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
If you guys head to everlastingveteran.com, you can check out how you can support the dog program. Head over to Rockin' Frenchies. They've been a supporter from the beginning, one of the breeders, and Meadow Ridge Wimes and Danes here in Connecticut. The Great Danes are amazing.
I grew up with
Um,
them.
oh,
Used to have them all over my house.
well, you should come
I used to ride them like they were horses in my house and
oh,
kitchen.
well, well, I'll tell you, we're going to be going back to Vets Rock November 16th at Mohegan Sun and be doing a dog donation there as well. Come check out the booth, come check out the apparel, and have a great time. I appreciate everybody for listening and supporting Everlasting Veteran thus far. And this is Tabatha.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
And everybody else, have a great day.